Hello, you beautiful degenerates, and welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to be joined by Spencer Aguiar. You can find him on Twitter at TOffSports. Unfortunately, our third member of our crew, Nick Bretwish, made a hole-in-one today. First one of his career, I believe it was from about 185, 190 yards with a 5-iron uphill. Shout out to him. He's out there buying drinks for everybody, so hit him up if you haven't already. Unfortunately, he's not here today, so Spencer and I are going to put the team on our backs and give you all you can handle for the Wyndham Championship this week at Sedgefield Country Club down there in Greensboro, North Carolina. This one's one of the more predictive courses on the PGA Tour from past history, so a lot of players who are horses for courses, including perhaps a Webb Simpson, has played really well here in the past. We'll talk about him. We'll talk about the top of the board. We'll talk about our outright picks, our place and market bets, and everything else we've got here. But first, Spencer, what is your best bet for the Wyndham Championship?
You know, Roberto, Nick can say that he's not on this show today because he's playing golf, but I really think there's two reasons to this. The first is the example that you just gave of Webb Simpson. I don't think he wants to be on a show where I can talk about Webb Simpson's past course history. So that was like immediately strike number one for him. And then the second situation is going to come down to my best bet that I'm going to give here. And I'm not really sure in what way I want to say this, like whether it's a top 40 at plus 160, an outright wager at 80-1. I think there's a head-to-head bet out there against Adam Schenk at minus 120. I'm going back to Alex Noren one last time this year. I figure it's the last regular season event of the season. It's likely my last opportunity to use him in all these markets. So let's just go for broke rather than giving one play and just say top 40 outright head-to-heads, the whole enchilada for Alex Noren this week.
In case you missed last week's episode, one of us bet Alex Noren at the 3M Open outright, and Nick said, didn't we ban him from this podcast? So he's fully back. We're back in Alex Noren's good graces, and we'll get the cap from you on why you like him throughout the markets in just a moment. But first, my best bet this week is going to be Mark Hubbard, 57th or better. Spencer, talk to me about why you really like Alex Noren.
I mean, I feel like I've given this example a lot on the show of why I like him, but I want to give a concrete answer to this because there's a really big difference between this tournament and some of these other events. So obviously it's going to be a tough sell. Like we know what Noren has done to Nick and I on this show historically in 2023, but there is a really significant difference when talking about projected win rates or safety on Noren when he's, hypothetically 300-1 at the Masters versus the 80-1 that we get here at the Wyndham Championship in a much weaker field. My model had him more in that 35-1 range because of his statistical profile that he possessed. He has 3 top 23 finishes over his past 4 starts. And then you get this data return that is really starting to click for him at a venue that should accentuate the high-end nature that placed him third in proximity from 125 to 175 yards. That is a range that gets an 8.2% increase in second shot rates. And then it generated a first place grade for him when recalculating the data for a pitch and putt contest. I think that's kind of how I would describe this venue. And we can get more into that when we talk about Sedgefield, but everybody's going to be hitting from the same spot, more or less. You're going to get a lot of that height and proximity from the 125 to 175 zone. And then really it comes down to who can make the most putts. So for him being number one there, it really shot him up my model. I think the second answer that a lot of people are going to look to is the long-term birdie projection, no matter how you run your data, is not going to look great for him just from the entire encapsulation of that answer. But when you put him on a birdie fest on a specific course like this, where I found comp courses, all of a sudden he experienced a 97 spot increase in my model for expected birdie rate at this course versus any generic venue on tour. 7th in my model at similar tracks over the past 2 years in birdie percentage. That's one of the reasons why he jumped up. 3rd in weighted proximity. All of that gives him the increase that many won't be willing to try and jump back onto because of past failures at tournaments that probably weren't as ideal as the one he's going to get this week. So, for anybody out there that has lost wagers on Noren, and I think between the three of us, and I won't throw you into this mix as much, Roberto, because you've had your spots here and there with this. I think Nick and I have been more of the ones driving this train into just like a brick wall over and over again. This is the best opportunity that he's had to find real success in a weaker field at a venue that accentuates all his high-end qualities here. So I don't love these answers. I know like one of the things you hear in the space is this player needs to win or this player needs to do this to get into the FedEx Cup playoffs. It makes it more difficult, but we know we need a high-end finish from Noren if he does want to compete moving forward into the season. I think this is as good of an opportunity for him as he's going to have to get that result.
Yeah, and he's also coming off a string of high finishes. T9 at the Rocket Mortgage 4 starts ago, then miscut at the Scottish Open, but T23 at the Open, and then a T13 last week at the 3M Open, where he gained strokes putting around the green and on approach. And off the tee, not going to be nearly as important this week, as you said, with a lot of players hitting from the same spots where there are going to be a lot of layups. I know there are way fewer drives that go over 280 yards here compared to an average PGA Tour course. So a lot of that favors him with off the tee not necessarily being a strength of his game. Getting into my best bet this week, I'm going with Mark Hubbard for similar reasons. Not a guy who's great off the tee, more accurate than long because he's not very long at all, but he's a guy who can absolutely fill it up once you get into that pitch and putt range. He's 14th overall this year on strokes gained approach, and he's top 30 in both par 3 and par 4 scoring. One note about Sedgefield, it's a par 70 this week, and there are only 2 par 5s. So there are 12 par 4s, and 8 of those are between 400 and 450 yards. So going to be a real premium on par 4 scoring. That's something that I have put an emphasis on throughout my card this week, whether it's outrights, top 40s, to make the cut or miss the cut. I really want those guys who, when they get a wedge in their hand or a short iron in their hand, who's going to be able to score and go low. I like Mark Hubbard's chances. I don't know that he can necessarily win this week, but given that strong approach game, like I said, 14th overall on the PGA Tour, one of the best in this field, with most of the top end players on tour being the top end players on approach, not playing this week because they know they're going to play 3 straight weeks coming up in the playoffs. So I love Hubbard for 57th or better. He's shown some strong form recently as well. And we saw him last week. I believe he was 40-1 to win. And this week he's over at 80-1. I don't think he can necessarily win this tournament, but I think he's got a high floor, and I'll take him to essentially make the cut and not play horrifically over the weekend. Spencer, let's talk about, go ahead.
No, I was just going to just add to the point that you said a second ago, because I think that weighted par 4 range that I ran between 400 to 450 yards is a really intriguing one. He graded 7th in my model when I ran it from that perspective there. And I worry a little bit about some of his off the tee metrics. Like even at these club down courses, he was outside the top 100 for me. Maybe that ends up hurting his upside to actually win this contest. But like, as you said, one of the better iron players in this field, he's really turned that part of his game around this season to where it's just been good iron performances over and over again this year. And when you think of that 125 to 175 range, he's a top 25 player in my model from that distance. So there's probably more safety there than meets the eye by at least the sports books. Bet365, they're releasing that number. As I said, I do worry a little bit about his general inaccuracy, even though he's an accurate golfer. I don't know why that is, that all of a sudden his total driving got worse in my model in that perspective with it. But I think that weighted par 4 from 400 to 450 yards is really one of the keys here, just because you only have 2 par 5s. You're going to have 8 holes that stretch between that distance. And that's where a lot of those opportunities are going to come into play. And it's kind of like the same setup over and over and over again. And if you can find success from that range and then make the putts, that's how you're going to work yourself up the leaderboard. And with Hubbard being 7th there, that's a really good number for him to be able to do that.
If you're looking at why his off the tee numbers might have dropped for you, he had his worst off the tee week of the whole season last week over there in Minnesota. But it's a tale of 2 sides for him. He's been horrible off the tee in his last 5 starts, but a lot of these starts have been courses where you can just bomb it off the tee, and that's not necessarily his game. But if you look at his approach numbers, really strong over the last, since the RBC Heritage, gaining strokes on approach in every single one of those tournaments except for 2. It's like 10 of 12 where he's gained strokes on approach. He's been really strong on approach. So I really like that floor. Looking at the last real club down course, for me, is TPC River Highlands for the Travelers Championship. And he gained 1.4 strokes per round on approach there, which is really strong. Relatively small sample size because only 2 rounds, because he missed the cut because of his really poor off the tee performance. But the putter's been really strong for him too, gaining strokes in 5 consecutive track tournaments. So if he is in the same spot off the tee in this pitch and putt contest, I like those chances for him. The question is, can he do that?
Yeah, ninth in my model in that pitch and putt recalculation that I ran. So if he can just find enough fairways, it's a different story for him. But let's see if he can do that, I guess.
We've already touched on Sedgefield Country Club briefly with the emphasis on par 4 scoring, specifically in that 400 to 450 range. What else are you weighing more heavily in your model this week? Or what are you thinking about this week for players whom you might want to target in different markets?
Yeah, so we have Sedgefield Country Club, 7,127 yards. It's a par 70. I think that's an important factor just because we have 2 par 5s instead of 4. You have these fast Bermuda greens. I would say the greens are typical of a Donald Ross design when looking into the small surfaces and the undulation throughout the property. A lot of that adds into the mix for why we get an increased rate for 3-putt percentage on the track. So I looked on fast Bermuda greens, tried to throw in some 3-putt percentage there. I thought that was a key metric to look into. As both of us have talked about, 8 of the par 4s measure between 400 to 450 yards. That is a very significant rate that obviously explains that 8.2% increase that I talked about with Noren when looking at iron shots between 125 to 175 yards. I think birdie percentage will play a factor since the event routinely plays around 20 under par or better. But above anything else, Roberto, this is a ball striking course that demands excellence in finding fairways off the tee above all else. I do believe trying to find comp courses that stretch under 7,200 yards is usually worth looking into when you can find that similar setup of past venues. So that's going to be, driving accuracy on some of these shorter courses kind of gives you a better full spectrum answer there instead of that wonky dispersion and expectation when you just look at strokes gained off the tee or strokes gain accuracy at courses that are like 7,500 yards. Not quite the same setup. There's a lot of difference here, but it kind of goes back, Roberto, to what you talked about at the beginning of this. It's one of those venues where there is this production of rollover predictability when we look into its ranking of inside the top 12 for the most consistent venues on tour in yearly performance. I think this track just sort of renders an expectation that you would expect when looking into it from a historical perspective. That's going to help marginally to find value in some of these markets. I thought that's why I was able to maybe have more bets on here because we have a really good amount of data that we can pull from past years. Also, on top of it, the data seems to be very consistent in the expectation of what you're looking for it. So for me, it's a ball strikers course. It's can you find fairways off the tee, but can you find fairways at the tee at similar comp courses? I think that driving accuracy number is really faulty in most ways of looking at it because this is not your standard course where, for example, a Rory McIlroy, let's say if he goes and plays a course that's 7,600 yards and he can just bomb it wherever he wants to bomb it to, well, maybe all of a sudden he hits less fairways for that reason. Like this is a club down course where everybody's landing in a very similar area over and over again. So some of these guys that are stronger, and there's players in this field, like I would say a Cameron Davis is a really good example, or a Taylor Pendrith. These are guys that at club down courses have actually found more success historically. So it's kind of how I built my card this week, but there's a lot of blueprints from the past that we can pull from.
I'll echo all those thoughts. One other thing I added was just par 4 scoring and birdie or better percentage, just because we have 12 par 4s here, which normally we don't have. But everything else I'll echo, especially the club down courses and how you look at driving accuracy, because driving accuracy with the driver versus a tight hole where you want to hit 270 yards off the tee is a different problem to solve. Let's get into your outright card. Who do you got?
I like the outright board this week. I think the hold percentage isn't necessarily any better than we typically get during one of these more significant events. But there were more errors at the top in overpricing many names in that sub 35 to 1 range. That's something that you and I talked about before we came on this show. Mm-hmm. I always like events that are similar to this because books don't often price options as well when we aren't dealing with the Scotty Schefflers, John Rahms, Rory McIlroys of the world. You get a lot of inflation at the top of names I am much lower on than consensus. And then you get this respectable shift in the 50 to 1 plus range of golfers that my model didn't have any lower when comparing them to the Justin Thomases or Shane Lowrys of the world. It's not that players like that can't win, and this is the discussion that you and I were having, but it does create an interesting value difference when, we take Thomas and Lowry, for example, here. My math had them overpriced by probably 1.5% to 2% in projected win equity. That might not sound like a ton, but it's a large number when discussing something with a sub 2% implied probability to begin with. So a lot of that for me push names more into this 50 to 1 plus range. That's kind of where the value ended up going for me. I've talked about Alex Noren already at 80 to 1. We don't need to spend any more time than I spent on him in this entire season talking about him. So we can go past him for all the reasons that I liked him. I took Chris Kirk at 50 to 1. That would probably be my favorite wager on the board for someone just looking to find a ticket that should be around for 4 days. I have two massive win totals this week in Noren, and then a name that I'll get to after Kirk here. But Kirk's overall profile is much safer than those golfers because of the weighted strokes gained total and then the par 4 scoring from 400 to 450 yards in my model that helped him grade inside the top 5. We keep talking about that range being 8 of your opportunities. He was the number 1 player in my model looking at par 4 scoring from 400 to 450 yards. I just think there's a really nice floor for him, even though the recent results have kind of been hit and miss. I think that's why we get this inflation in this price right now to where he's drifted a little bit further than he should on this board. He's a golfer that I think both of us would agree should be more in that like 35, 40 to 1 range, maybe even a little bit less than that, depending on how you run it. But I really like Kirk's upside this week with the safety that he brings. I talked about there being 2 large outright wagers for me for this event. The second would be Ben Griffin at 90 to 1. Griffin so I have Noren over 12 units to win, and I have Griffin over 12 units. When we look at Griffin's statistical profile here, 4th at the venue last season, 3 top 33 finishes over his past 4 starts. That's generated this really nice combination of form and course fit. That is something that we saw heightened with the stats showing an enticing birdie making potential when given a short Donald Ross venue. I don't know if he wins, but there are a lot of ways to consider him in the market. This was one of the routes that I went into backing him. I'll have more options later that we'll talk about. I took Adam Hadwin at 60 to 1. Hadwin was really interesting, Roberto, because there was a ton of DFS discussion around him early on Monday, and maybe not enough conversation for him in the outright market. He's one of those golfers who's going to be volatile because of the back-to-back missed cuts, but it was the 34 spot improvement and weight of proximity that I had in my model that most intrigued me because it turned him from a mediocre iron player in expectation at any generic course on tour into really a top 30 choice for Sedgefield. He has a 10th here in 2021. That's going to show the upside potential. He has top 5 marks for weighted strokes gained total and overall bogey avoidance, specifically when running it for this track. Thought it was just a really good pronounced output opportunity that he presented there at the price. It's another player very similar to that Chris Kirk answer. Maybe not as much safety here, but the number has drifted much further than it should because of the recent form that we've gotten. I'd be very curious to hear about your take on this next player because I think he's a controversial name in the space. But I took Eric Cole at 70 to 1. Cole, if you're talking about inaccuracy, there's a lot of bad for him of his inability to find fairways, but he was one of those golfers at these club down venues that did see a significant increase for me. If you shop around, you can find better than the 70 to 1 price that I talked about. I've seen it as high as in the 90s if you really want to get technical with it, but it's that combination of weighted proximity that he has in his putter that really intrigued me here. If my model is correct that he's better at these club down venues, which I think naturally you would think that makes a lot of sense for a player that is good with his irons and good with the putter, that if he doesn't have that overabundance of distance to begin with, I mean, he's fine distance wise, but he's not going to give you that top 10 production. I think a club down venue for him just naturally helps. So I went to him at 70 to 1. And then I closed my card with the name I just talked about a second ago, Taylor Pendrith at 80 to 1. I thought Pendrith played really well last week during his miscut. He got off to a slow start because of the putter. You could argue that he drew the wrong end of the draw, just with the way that the heat was out there in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden he had to go back out in the morning after, he was kind of just didn't perform the way that he should have. But he ended Thursday as one of the 2 largest underachievers on the day for a score versus baseline projection in my model. The only golfer that would be higher than that was Steven Jaeger. I think for all the same reasons, I like Jaeger this week too, but it doesn't feel like we should be dealing with Jaeger at, 30 to 1, 35 to 1, 40 to 1. And then Pendrith at this 80 to 1 total. I thought these 2 prices were a lot closer to one another than we're getting in the market. So I like Jaeger a lot. This was kind of my way to get a very similar skill set of what I was looking for. And Pendrith here at double the price. And it was an easy way to wrap up this card just because I don't want to have a ton of exposure here. Like, obviously, 6 outrights are 6 outrights, but it's a big difference when they all range between 50 to 90 to 1. It leaves me some room for an in-tournament bet if I want one, but I kind of naturally thought in general the top of the board was overpriced, and pretty much any name you want to talk about, like, sure, they're going to be your most likely options that are going to win the event, but I didn't necessarily want Siwoo Kim at some of the numbers you were getting, or Russell Henley at some of the numbers. Like, it's really hard to stomach Russell Henley at 20 to 1, even if my model really likes him.
I completely agree. I think the top of the board was just overpriced for me.
Yeah.
I was only tempted in buying Siwoo Kim. I know he opened around 30, 33 in some places. I unfortunately didn't have access anywhere before, anywhere higher than 25 to 1. And he's only come down. And I've seen him as low as 19 to 1 in some
I
places
have two.
now.
I have two.
I believe on Bet365, since I do the opening odds post here on Action, he opened at 30 to 1 on Bet365, and now he's 19 to 1 as the co-favorite with Hideki Matsuyama. So not going to be able to buy on him unless I get him live. But like you, I started my card at 50 to 1 with Chris Kirk. And like you, I also have on my card the player whom he beat in the playoff at the Honda Classic in Eric Cole. You wanted my take on Eric Cole? Eric Cole is a fascinating player to me. 35-year-old rookie on the PGA Tour, lifelong mini tour player who's got, he probably won a mini tour tournament as we've been podcasting, but with the way he plays after, like immediately after tournaments, where he'll play Sunday on the PGA Tour and then fly out and play Monday morning somewhere else across the United States in a mini tour event and win. But this dude's just a gamer. He's a competitor. He's one of the only players on the PGA Tour whom you'll see priced under 100 or 200 to 1 in any given week, who is below average in both driving distance and driving accuracy. And for a guy who's small in stature, that is not very common on the PGA Tour. And it's a testament to the rest of his game and how well rounded he is everywhere else. He has some eye popping stats. So, looking at his strokes gained putting around the green and on approach, he ranks in the top 32 on the PGA Tour in all three. He's fourth in three putt avoidance, and putting this week is going to be very important. But he's also 23rd in birdie average, including 23rd in par four birdie or better, and top 50 in par three, par four, and par five birdie or better. You mentioned he's not very long off the tee, but he is the best player in proximity from over 275 yards, which that's a head scratcher for me. And you would think he would have more of those than anybody else on the PGA Tour because of how short he is and how much he makes the cut. And he's also top 30 in par three, par four, and par five scoring average, even despite those difficulties off the tee for him. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's got both upside and some safety this week, although I haven't found a way to bet him outside of the outright market yet, perhaps in the first round leader market, or if I find a good number in top 40-ish markets. But I found some other players whom I like with similar strengths, like Mark Hubbard, for example, whom just have better numbers. So that's where I'm backing him there. But I do think Cole is relatively safe this week. But getting back to Chris Kirk, a couple other metrics for him. He is 13th in strokes gained around the green. And with the Donald Ross courses, you can't go over the green. And it's also relatively challenging to get up and down on these courses. So just in case, I like that he's also strong around the green, sixth in three putt avoidance on the PGA Tour, and then strong everywhere else, as you mentioned. And then I've got a really limited outright card this week. So I've only got three players. We mentioned two of them. And the third one, because he's playing this week, I've got to bet him. It's Kevin Yu, my new favorite player on the PGA Tour. Guy who is an absolute flusher. If you bet on him last week, you know what happened with him on Saturday specifically, where he was, I think, 8 under through 11 holes and then finished at 3 or 4 under for the round, or around 5 under for the round, because he kept missing putts inside of 10 feet. He is a total mystery on the greens. He led the field in strokes gained putting a couple weeks ago. I believe it was at the John Deere Classic, and he's finished very near the bottom of the field in most of the other tournaments. He ranks out to the top 180 in strokes gained putting on tour. And the question is, if he can get that putter going, he's got everything else that you could possibly want. If you look in the Arizona State record books, you'll see his name along with Phil Mickelson and John Rahm with a bunch of their records for scoring averages, winning tournaments won, et cetera, et cetera. This dude's got some game. It's just a matter of when he figures out the putter. He's going to win on the PGA Tour sooner than later. And it's pretty surprising that he's already in the top 125 of the PGA Tour's FedEx Cup standings. and he's only played in 13 tournaments. And if you look at his numbers, they are inflated because he's not playing in these designated events, which are where you're going to find most of the tougher courses and the major championships where guys are shooting over par and making the cut. So take this with a grain of salt. His numbers are slightly inflated because he's playing on easier courses, but they're still staggering. Third in par 4 scoring average, which leads everyone in this field. He ranks in the top 16 in each of par 3, par 4, and par 5 scoring average. He's 6th in par 4 birdie or better percentage, 7th in overall birdie average, 2nd in green and regulation percentage, and 3rd in the entire PGA Tour in strokes gained off the tee, 32nd in distance, 47th in accuracy. I am intrigued to see how he plays on this kind of a club down golf course, but just the sheer birdie making ability that he has is worth at least a nibble at 100-1 for me. I've also already bet him at 80-1 for first round leader because he's got an early tee time, and I'm going to bet him in upside markets. The putter leaves me. I wanted to bet him for top 10, but I don't know how much I trust the putter. So I gave myself a little bit more leeway for top 20 at plus 400. That's on Bet365. But you can also find him in the top 10 market at plus 850. So depending on what you have available, I think those are all very intriguing markets. I am very interested in Kevin Yu. If he doesn't win this week, I think he's got a great chance of winning in the fall. He'll have 6-7 weeks to figure out that putter in the meantime before we can start betting him out there. But I'm very intrigued by Kevin Yu. And if he balls out this week and makes it to the playoffs, we're going to have a little extra money in our pockets to keep betting him.
Yeah, my one concern is that Kevin Yu wins and I don't have the ticket on him because I am a big believer, and we talked about this last week on the show. I think he wins during the fall, during one of those events. So that maybe, heightens his ability to use the driver off the tee a little bit more than he gets here. But man, Roberto, there are some of these metrics inside of my model. The way that he pops on them, it's just staggering. Like the GIR percentage, any of those ball striking totals, any of the weighted scoring marks that he has. Like, if the putter can just be okay, he has legitimate win equity anytime he tees it up, because I don't think that a lot of books have caught on to just how good of a golfer that this guy is. We obviously talked last week about the meniscus tear that he had to undergo surgery on, and he missed a bunch of months in the middle of the season there, to where he was kind of catching traction and then immediately just taken off of the PGA Tour. And now he's back on, and we've seen the flashes, as you talked about last week. All of a sudden, I mean, he tore up the course, and then just like that, it was like a flash in the pan, and it was off the leaderboard in 2 seconds. But I really like this guy's potential moving forward. Couldn't get there on a ticket this week personally, but this is my worst fear coming together of him winning this, Roberto. And it's like, we got to come on the show next week, and it's like, well, we talked about it. We know Kevin Yu is one of the most talented players that there is. And, congratulations on hitting it, but I was not savvy enough to jump on it. And it's always the concern when he's in a field, because I think that his potential is just massive.
I hope that we get Kevin Yu on some featured hole cover or featured group coverage sooner than later, whether it's this week or in the fall, because it's an absolute roller coaster ride, and it's really fun to watch when you get a chance.
Yeah.
As a reminder, the Links and Locks podcast is proudly presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer. Bet $1 on any game and get $200 in bonus bets. Must be 21 or older. Offer is available in Colorado, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, and Iowa in the U.S. Gambling problem? Call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, Spencer, you hinted at some other matchup bets earlier in the podcast. What kind of matchup bets do you have, and what else do you got on your card this week?
Yeah, I will very quickly run through everything else that I have. So, it's going to be a lot of the players that we've already talked about. I kind of just kept consistently going back to them over and over again in different ways of trying to get exposure to them. But unfortunately, this number, like I questioned even talking about it on the show. I do think there's one book out there that you can still get this price, and that's the reason why I'm going to mention it. But I wrote about this in my article, and it moved by like 30 points almost immediately from it being released. But it's Ben Griffin minus 115 over Sam Stevens. I talked about this same feature at the Travelers Championship for Stevens when I looked into him experiencing a downshift in expected strokes gained total because of the removal of some of the shots outside of 175 yards. The movement isn't going to be quite as extreme here, since that event took him from 38th to 114th in projected strokes gained total. Whereas here at Sedgefield, it only moved him from 38th to 79th. Still, the 100th place rank that I have for him when running proximity between that 125 to 175 range really was a detriment that could prove costly on these quick Bermuda greens. My model ranks Stevens inside the bottom 15 of the field in projected putting on similar green complexes historically. And then the lack of Donald Ross history that he has only added to the problem against who's really one of my favorite golfers on the slate. Obviously, I've talked a lot about Griffin already, but I think this is an interesting point just to talk about a few more names. When I ran my model of all 6 categories of players that ranked inside the top 45 in the categories that I looked at, Griffin was one of them. And then there were 9 other names. So it would be Sungjae Im, Eric Cole, Hideki Matsuyama, Adam Hadwin, Russell Henley, Chris Kirk, Alex Noren, JT Poston, Taylor Pendrith. The reason why a lot of those names that you just heard me rattle off are the ones that were the deeper shots in this tournament that I bet in the outright market. To me, I mean, it also means guys like Sungjae, Hideki, Henley, any of those names have a really good chance to find success too. I just didn't like the price that they were at, but I think Griffin's an interesting name to try to attack in this field. And then I took Alex Noren at minus 120 over Adam Schenk, as I talked about at the beginning. A lot of this just comes down to, Schenk is such a boomer bust golfer. Unfortunately, this number did move by about 27 points before we recorded the show. It was at plus 107 before I got to this minus 120 total. So I think that kind of shows, Roberto, how much value I had on this, that I still think minus 120 is going to be value here. It's only down to about 15 points because of this overinflation that I do think the market is experiencing with Schenk here. We've seen Schenk miss 4 of his past 5 cuts at the venue. I do realize he has 4 top 7 finishes over his last 7 starts. But when it has not gone right, he's missed 3 missed cuts sprinkled into that mix. I just think because Schenk is so boom or bust, there's a downside that comes into play against Noren, who's one of the safer players in the market for me, no matter how I wanted to look at it. No, it's a really controversial take to say that Noren is safe with all the time he's missed the cut with me backing him, but I think it's a different spot for him this week. And then just very quickly to rattle off the placement market here, just because I've talked about these players, Ben Griffin, top 40, plus 145. I also took him top 10 at plus 750. Alex Noren, top 40, plus 160. The top 10 is plus 800. I took Taylor Pendrith, top 20 at plus 410. That was kind of just me trying to shoot for the upside there, because I do think that it's a little volatile for him to make the cut. I think once he does, he has a little bit more upside than some of these other names that I decided not to play. Then the last play for me, Chesson Hadley, top 40, plus 175. And just to quickly rattle through Hadley's statistics here, he's been trending with 4 top 33 finishes over his past 5 starts. He carries this great course history after posting back-to-back top 15 finishes. The metrics were extremely strong. He experienced a 44 spot upgrade in expected strokes gained total in this field. The weighted proximity did undergo a 15 spot improvement over his baseline. I just thought there was a lot of potential safety on this wager when we looked at his plus 175 price that you could find. I don't know what his upside is necessarily. To me, he's one of these players that works better as a matchup or, a top 40 than he works as an outright or like a top 5 bet. It doesn't mean that he can't work his way up the leaderboard, but I did want to get exposure to him at plus 175. So I kind of have a bulky card this week with all the Noren and Griffin stuff that I have with everything else sprinkled into the mix. But I like this tournament. This to me is more of like my standard event that I would want to bet, to where we don't have all these high-end names here. And I thought there were ways to get more value just because of the overpricing that did occur at the top with some of these golfers.
So last week, I don't know how much National Geographic or science stuff you consume, Spencer. Last week was Shark Week, but this week you're backing Ben Griffin, the lone shark, in the outright market, head-to-heads, top 40 and top 10s. Let's keep Shark Week going.
This is a wild statement that I'm going to give here, and I understand this, and I don't think, and my model doesn't think he's the most likely person to win this contest. Like, when I run this for upside, all of a sudden Sungjae and Hideki and all these guys pop up the way that they should. I do think Chris Kirk is underpriced for this reason, but because he was 4th for me, like I thought he should have been more of like a 20-something to 1 golfer for being technical with the price there. But if we're just talking about overall rank of taking stats and course history and form and everything that comes into the mix there, and you're telling me who is the most consistent golfer in my model, Ben Griffin graded number 1 overall. Alex Noren was number 2. these are not standard answers I give on this show. I know it's not as strong of a field as we usually talk about, but it's very unlikely for me to run an event that like the favorites in Vegas are not the favorites in my model in any of those iterations that I'm talking about, specifically the overall rank here. So that was something to me where I felt more confident playing Griffin and Noren. It doesn't mean that they don't have the likelihood to still implode. There's still golfers that, you know, they're 80 to 1, 90 to 1 for a reason. I just think that when you're looking specifically in some of these placement matchups or matchup markets here, they're being priced against golfers that are much lower on my model because I have a general level of safety on those two that the rest of the public isn't going to be able to get to, specifically these sports books here that aren't going to grade Noren and Griffin as aggressively as I am. So I tried to take my opportunity here where I could. As I said, if Griffin comes out and he misses the cut, it's always a possibility, but I really like these two. And like, to me, it's a little bit of a different spot than times I've talked about Noren in the past at the Masters or any of these tournaments, to where like he was like Noren at the Masters when we had the conversation, Roberto, was if he hits the upside, he top 10s the tournament. And if he hits the downside, he comes in dead last place. Like the model didn't necessarily produce that same output here. It kind of just produced him across the board that it loved his weight of proximity. It loved his putting. There was a lot more safety for him to produce these top 40 sort of finishes than you might get at like any general course on tour. So that was my thought process and why I have a little bit more exposure than I typically would.
I like it. I think it all makes sense. And I'm going to tell you on the Noren pick in the outright market. I got room on the card. I'm also going to go with Adam Schenk, top 10. I like his upside. I love the approach play for him. I like the putting combination. I agree that the floor is on the ground, but last start was at the Open, played really well at some of the US courses before that. I think I've had a little bit of success with players who played well in the mainland here and then went across the pond, played poorly. Targeted Doug Gim with my best bet last week, and he finished around 25th, and we had him for top 40. So shout out to Doug Gim playing again this week. But I am willing to buy a little bit lower on Shank than I think he should be in some of those upside markets. But I agree, in as far as safety goes, not the safest golfer you could find, or even close to that in this field. I'm also betting Lucas Glover for top 10 at plus 800. Guy who's absolutely flushing it with his irons and really accurate off the tee. The problem with him is I don't know that I trust his blocky putter to win this tournament. So I considered him for the outright play, but I'm going to settle for the top 10 instead. I'm also going to bet Garrick Higgo, 59th or better. Last week we mentioned players who just missed our card, and Garrick Higgo is one of those guys who I've been keeping my eye on as a player who is getting increasingly accurate off the tee after being just a bomber when he got on tour and won that tournament over there in South Carolina. Now he goes to North Carolina. I think he's got a chance to have some success this week. And at 59th or better, I just need him to make the cut. And we mentioned with the driver, he's always been long, but now he's accurate. On approach, he was really, really struggling throughout the season, but he's finished. But he's gained strokes on approach in each of his last two tournaments. With a putter as well, had some struggles, but he's coming off of his two best putting weeks in the last two tournaments of his entire season. And then scoring, top 21 finishes in 3 straight, 50th or better in 6 of 7. All we need is 59th or better this week, and I think he gets it done. So I'm betting him there. And in the placement market at Bet365 at minus 120. And then we mentioned Mark Hubbard, 57th or better as well. And then finally, I've got one exotic bet this week, which was more of a gut feel bet than normal. So I'm betting this one, just kind of sprinkling it. Nicholas Lindheim. He is plus 160 to miss the cut out there. He has played in 2 PGA Tour events this year. So if you're someone who hangs out on Sunday trying to learn about Nicholas Lindheim, you're not going to do it because he hasn't made a cut this year on the PGA Tour. He's played really well on the Korn Ferry Tour. He's got top 8 finishes and 4 or 5 starts, but those span all the way back to March. So he's just not playing a ton of competitive golf at the highest levels here on the Korn Ferry Tour or the PGA Tour. Both those PGA Tour starts came way back in the season as well. And he's played in this tournament 3 times when he had his card between 2017 and 2019, missed the cut all 3 times. And just by looking at his data golf statistics, he doesn't seem like a guy who has a super high floor. He hasn't had a lot of success on the PGA Tour. If you look at those 3 years when he was on the tour, it's a lot of miscuts. For him to be priced in the outright market I think I want to say around 65 to 1, and in the top 40 and to miss the cut markets, I just think he's way overpriced for a guy who hasn't done it and done it recently, at least on the PGA Tour level. Hasn't really had many opportunities. And now with the lights shining brighter, this is going to be his one opportunity for a little while because obviously he's not going to play in the playoffs unless he wins this week. I just think the number was a little bit too rich. So at plus 160, I'm sprinkling him to miss the cut. It's a bit of a hater move and killjoy move, but Spencer, I think we've made some money in these situations before.
I mean, I think when everybody goes one way and everybody's looking for the upside solutions, we're always trying to find a reason why somebody's going to miss the cut, or as you said, that kind of be a hater in these situations. I don't necessarily have a take here. My model does not like him. I know that all the markets out there that I respect do seem to like him. He's a favorite in every head-to-head matchup against some pretty quality opponents. He's a favorite against Nick Hardy. He's a favorite against Andrew Putnam. He's a favorite against Adam Svensson. I don't know. I have absolutely no take here one way or another. I would generally tend to agree based off of my model's answer that he's going to miss the cut, but that would be my only concern, that there seems to be enough influential money out there that does like him and even likes him in the outright market. And you mentioned Data Golf, and I was curious to see where Data Golf had proper on him, because my proper of what he should be is not the number that we have. I'll tell you that right now. He should be much, much, much higher. Data Golf has him as a golfer that they actually had value on it, the numbers you could still get in the space. I thought that was surprising. Not saying that they're correct. I would trust more of what my model is saying, that he's not going to win the event, but just an interesting note that there is influential money on him for whatever that's worth.
For a guy who is not a young whippersnapper, he's 38 years old in 8 months. So he's not like some of these other guys like an Akshay Bhatia or a Nikolai Højgaard who is bursting onto the scene, who doesn't have a bunch of PGA Tour experience because he just hasn't made it there yet. This guy's been around, and he's not even like an Eric Cole who hasn't gotten there yet. He is somebody who's been there, and he's just not a PGA Tour player right now for whatever reason. He's played awesome in a small sample size, and I just think the number's too rich. But if he does make the cut, hopefully we see him in contention on Sunday, and we get a chance to put a little to get a little nice outright number on him live as well.
It's wild to me that he is shorter in the market than an Eric Cole would be at a lot of books. I can't say I quite understand that. And sometimes when I don't understand things and I don't have a massive take, I just say, you know what, like maybe I don't know what I'm talking about here. I will sit this one out. But I would generally tend to agree with you here. He's a quote unquote journeyman, if you want to call it that, with the age that he is. But there's enough reason why he's getting traction, and there's always a reason behind that.
Good news for him is that, like we said, only 5 starts on the Korn Ferry Tour this year, 4 of them top 8s, including a win in his last chance at the Ascendant in mid-July. He's number 10 on the Korn Ferry Tour standing, so he's going to get his PGA Tour card, very, very likely. So we're going to have a chance to learn about him this week, and maybe we play him in the fall at some point.
Maybe so.
Spencer, anything else you would like to touch on before we get into our rapid fire segment?
No, that's it for me. Let's get into the rapid fire this week.
All right. So we've mentioned that we don't like the top of the board. We haven't bet anybody shorter than 50 to 1 this week outright. Among the players who are in this top tier, and I'll give you Matsuyama, Siwoo Kim, Sungjae Im, and Russell Henley. If you had to bet one of them at 25 to 1, which one would you take?
I mean, I feel like I find a reason to bet Sungjae Im every single week. He would probably naturally be my answer if I could get a ticket, but I think my model seems to like Russell Henley the most. I mean, I guess I should go with my model on this one rather than saying Sungjae Im for every single answer, but it would probably be those two and then everybody else beneath them.
I take Hideki Matsuyama, but I don't love the number either way, even at 25.
Yeah, I don't either.
It's Bermuda grass greens this week, which is the first time we've had Bermuda grass in quite a while on the PGA Tour. We've been mostly in bent grass recently, and then rye over across the pond. But a guy who's known for his putting on Bermuda grass, Sam Burns at plus 2,700, is in the field this week. If you had to get one outright ticket between him, Denny McCarthy, JT Poston, and Shane Lowry, we're all between 27 and 32 to 1. let's say I gave you an outright ticket on one of those guys at 35 to 1. Which one would you take?
I would take JT Poston. Burns would be the second choice because of the Bermuda background there. But my model really liked Poston. I wish I could have had a different price on him. To me, he was one of those names when this opened up. I mean, if you could have told me that I could have had, if I could have gotten something in the 40s, I mean, I think that was like wishful thinking, but if I could have had 40, 45 to 1, I would have punched that ticket and I would have had that wager. I couldn't get there at the 30s that are in the space. I think if you really shop around, you might be able to find a 33 out there. Still was a little bit too short for my liking, but I think Poston has legitimate win equity in this tournament. Like, I would not be shocked if he wins this event and kind of spoils a lot of this for what I have going on in some of the more value bets.
JT Poston, a guy who's proven to be a horse for courses, and these type of courses, he's had success, and we know that putter can absolutely fill it up. A couple of other really interesting players. We'll just talk about them briefly. Justin Thomas is 38 to 1. Any markets that stand out to you to potentially back him or fade him?
I mean, no, because I still think he's overpriced in all markets, but I guess like if I was willing to take a shot on him, I mean, maybe I would do so as a top 10 at any of those. I think Bet365 has them at like plus 425, if I'm not mistaken, for a top 10. I still think it's a little bit too short. But I would be shooting, like, to me, it's either I am not putting a wager on him. Like, I'm not going to fade him anywhere because it's already built into all the prices and matchups at this point. And if I was going to play him, I would just shoot for as much upside as I could, maybe without that win, because I still think that his number has been drained in the outright market. Like, I don't have any interest in a 30, 33 to 1 price. I mean, maybe you can find better if you shop around out there, but maybe he can flash and show a top 10, because I mean, I know according to him, he says he's playing better than the stats show. And maybe that's true. It's like he has random implosions here and there that's taking him out of the mix. I wouldn't be shocked if Thomas put it together and all of a sudden we saw him come in 8th place here and, he gets this back going and then all of a sudden gives Zach Johnson a decision for the Ryder Cup here and makes this much trickier than he would want it to be. But I don't know. It's either like a top 5, top 10 bet, or I'm just completely out on any way. I'm not fading him or playing him.
Yeah, I would say shoot for upside with him, but the putter just gives me hesitation to do even that. So it's a complete stay away for me.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a course where 3-putt percentage comes into play, and the 3-putt avoidance is just not there for him right now. He is just struggling immensely with that data. So it's just a stay away spot for me. I would not be shocked if he produced, but I also wouldn't be shocked if he missed the cut.
If he does make the cut, I think next week, or if he does really well this week and somehow sneaks into that top 70, I think next week in Memphis could be a better spot for him. If he flips a switch this week. Another guy whom we mentioned last week, Ludwig Aberg, also priced at 38 to 1, along with Justin Thomas on Bet365's enhanced win market as of our recording time on Tuesday late afternoon. Aberg really struggled on approach last week, and we talked about him as being someone who could potentially be a generational driver of the golf ball. Any markets that you think might be interesting to back him in this week, or just any thoughts on him in general?
So I think he's and I think markets show this, unfortunately. And then the players he's against that I really wanted to have a head-to-head bet, like they were not players I necessarily wanted to back. I think he's an intriguing fade candidate this week. Now, I don't know how to fade him because I couldn't really find an area to do so. I mean, maybe that's a miscut bet and you go that route with it. But my model did not like, there's 2 events this year that my model did not like him. It didn't like him at the Scottish and he missed the cut, and it doesn't love him here. I worry a little bit about what we're going to get out of him this week. I think he's a generational talent off the tee. I think he loses some of that upside at this venue. I'm kind of just out on him this week, but you look at him specifically, there's a book out there where he's priced against Siwoo Kim. Siwoo Kim's like minus 170 against him in a head-to-head matchup. Like, I'm not going to lay that juice to get a bet out in that way, but I think that kind of shows that the market is not reacting well to Ludwig.
I think it would be interesting to back someone against him, so to fade him, with some player at plus money who might be more of a plotter or someone who just has a higher floor with accuracy up the tee and approach play. But I think those are the exact matchups the books aren't going to give us.
Well, see, this is what I was just going to say. And Bet365, I really would love them to be the first ones to do this. Give us the opportunity to pick our matchups here. Like, let me find the golfer that I would like to take. Like, let me take Ben Griffin against him this week. Let me take Alex Noren against him this week and probably get it at a plus number and feel very confident that I'm getting the right side of the bet at a plus value there. The first book that puts that out into the space is going to get a lot of action from people. That is going to, I assume, come sooner than later from somebody. Bet365 is kind of very revolutionary in a lot of the stuff that they do with their finishing position markets. Wouldn't be shocked if they're the ones that give it to us, but I think it's a very intriguing route in the future of golf betting when we do have that capability.
Another couple players whom are trendy picks this week: Aaron Rye, 38-1, Alex Smalley, 38-1. You're going to get bludgeoned over the head with people telling you that Alex Smalley's a member here and how this tournament's helped him get on the PGA Tour. If you had to take an outright ticket on one of Rye or Smalley at 40-1, which one would you be?
I'd probably take Smalley. I mean, I think both of them are fine. It kind of goes back to the Smalley answer that I've given a lot this year. Par 70 venue, anytime he gets less par fives, I think his upside increases for these events. Kind of see the same thing here with the weighted scoring for him. Just the reduction of par five scoring really did grade him well in my model. Now, he's an option that graded better for me from safety. Like that would be more of a top 40 sort of wager than maybe to win the event, but at the right number. And I'll tell you this, Roberto, there are a lot of books out there where he is shrinking by the second, probably for the reasons that you've talked about him with this course and this being a home game for him and all those answers. Like it's reduced this number, but I think Smalley's a good fit for this course, even beyond any of that, which is kind of now when you have that hometown narrative plus the statistical fit. I mean, it's just the number was always going to run away from us at some point.
I'll get you out of here on this last one, Spencer. These guys are all 45-1. If I gave you a ticket on them at 50-1, which one would you take? Steven Yeager, Taylor Moore, or Benny On?
I think my answer is always Jaeger, and I wanted to get there even. I think you can find a 45 if you shop around right now. I think it's an intriguing price. Like, I think it's even like intriguing enough to where I have enough room in my card that I have considered adding him. That putter is just, I mean, it is disastrous every single week. Like I talked about it with Pendrith of him being the second largest underachiever, and I talked about Jaeger being the largest underachiever for me. This is almost an every week answer. You could just stick Jaeger's name in. Who was the biggest underachiever? And this is like taking his baseline putting projections. We're taking his numbers historically, and he's still underachieving based off of his own numbers. I'm not taking the numbers of Denny McCarthy and saying, oh, look how badly he's underachieving here. I'm taking his historical 2-year data. I don't know. He's getting worse with the putter every single week somehow. So, you know, to me, this is the type of golfer that when it finally flips for him with the putter, he wins, and he wins going away. And it's like, well, we knew this was the situation that was going to occur because the ball striking metrics were too good for this to be the case. And I guess the one answer I'd give here above anything else when we're talking about the putter, just because I thought it was an interesting thing to note. So the 3-putt percentage is a problem here. He's 93rd in my model, but when we look at some of these quicker Bermuda surfaces, and I tried to run comp courses for how he should grade with his putter for this venue over anything else, he did see a positive trajectory, and it was a substantial positive trajectory. So if there's an opportunity that the putter works for him, I don't know, Roberto. Like, I mean, I do this every single week to where I want to have a Jaeger ticket. It's like kind of the same thing that we talked about with Kevin Yu. I don't want to miss that ticket when he actually hits. And, you know, he's a golfer right now that needs a big performance. Like he's right inside the top 70. He wants to, I'm sure, get inside the top 50 or the top 30. He's going to need a result. I don't think that's a reason to back him. As I said at the beginning of the show, that's usually a negative because there's too much pressure on these guys. But I think Jaeger is the one name for me. If you were to ask me, who is the golfer I do not have on my card right now, who's the name that I wish I had or I might put, it would be Steven Jaeger.
I got to agree with you. I really like Jaeger. Those approach numbers are incredible. The question is the putter. Got to give my guy Taylor Moore a shout out. Of course, he has a win earlier this year on another Donald Ross golf course, I believe, over there at the Valspar. And we know the putter's not a problem for him. Approach play, not in the same category as Steven Yeager, but a guy who grinds it out. Interesting string of results for him in his last 6 tournaments. He's got 5 missed cuts, but he does have a top 4 finish at the Rocket Mortgage Classic in that span. So interesting player to keep an eye on. I'm always watching out for Taylor Moore. Spencer, where can the people find you the rest of this week?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at TeeOffSports. Not the name of the website anymore. You're going to have to get used to me saying that over and over again, but you can find me over there. I will have an article out for Action Network on Wednesday. We will talk about some of the values on the board. Hopefully it will be a round 1 matchup that I found value on. If you like any of the numbers that you heard, you can get my model over at Rotoballer. And just right before we get out of here, just want to ask you this question, Roberto. What number would you need on Steven Yeager to punch the ticket?
Around 60.
I'm so tempted. I want to almost say this is the in-pod play that I'm adding right now.
But I know that you're higher on Yeager than I normally am.
I think Yeager and Moore are like the 2 golfers. 2 of the, I guess for me, and I kind of have been a very big proponent of this. It's been Jason Day, not because I like Jason Day, but because what my model's saying. Ricky Fowler, Wyndham Clark, Taylor Moore. These are all guys that have won on tour. The one player that is the one who hasn't won would be Steven Yeager, that my model is so much higher on than consensus, and it feels like at some point the result's going to come. I'm going to make it official. I'm going to say that my last outright wager that I'm adding to the card, because I do have room, Steven Yeager 45-1. I will add that as the last closing note for the show.
All right, parting shot with Yeager for Spencer. You can find me on Twitter at RobertoA213. We will not acknowledge the app name change. You can also find my first round leader article on Action Network. That'll be posted tomorrow afternoon. So be sure to check that out. And you can find our pal Nick Bretwish on Twitter at SticksPicks. That's Sticks with an X. You can get a video of him celebrating his hole-in-one today. And I'm sure we'll have him back in the fold next week for the FedEx Cup playoffs, the first tournament, which is the FedEx St. Jude Championship. Should be a lot of fun. Ball Strikers Golf Course going to have the top 70 players on the PGA Tour. Should be some drama coming down the stretch this week. Of course, other guys trying to get their top 125 as well to hold on to that PGA Tour card. So a lot to watch out for this week on the PGA Tour at the Wyndham Championship. As a reminder, the Links and Locks podcast is proudly presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer. Bet $1 on any game and get $200 in bonus bets. Must be 21 or older. Offer is available in Colorado, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, and Iowa in the U.S. Gambling problem? Call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. So that'll do it for today's podcast. Thanks for joining us here at Links and Locks in our Wyndham Championship preview presented by Bet365. More great golf content from our Action Network team. Check out our Best Bets episode from earlier this week, featuring our own Jason Sobel and Ben Everill as they run down their top plays for this week's tournament. Be sure to check out theactionnetwork.com and the Action app for all of our great golf betting and DFS content. Our best bets are live out there. You can find Jason Sobel's mega guide where he's got picks for basically every possible market. You can find Chris Murphy and Joshua Perry's tournament previews. Derek Farnsworth preview will be live on Wednesday morning, most likely when you listen to this. So check everything out on our Action Network website and app. Big thanks again to everyone who makes this podcast possible, especially our producers, David, Sophia, Noah, and Matt. Thanks again for you, our audience, for tuning in. And here's to hoping you hit the green this week in Greensboro.